Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The tension in the Chancellor Mansion was palpable, the air thick with unease and a hint of fear, as Victor paced back and forth in his office, his jaw clenched and his eyes dark with fury, replaying the words he had just overheard in his mind like a poisonous mantra. Kill him! The memory of Jack's voice, calm yet laced with a venomous determination, intertwined with Matt's cold, calculating tone, seared itself into Victor's consciousness, and he could feel a storm of rage building inside him, threatening to consume him entirely. Every nerve in his body was electrified as he clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him like an unbearable burden, because he had always known deep down that Jack was capable of deception, capable of striking at him when he least expected it. But to hear it spoken so openly, to realize that his own enemies, his family, his supposed allies, were plotting to destroy him, planning his downfall with such precision and malice, it was a humiliation that struck at the very core of Victor Newman's being, a blow to the ego of a man who had built an empire on control, on power, on the certainty that he could manipulate anyone and anything to suit his ambitions. Victor's mind raced as he considered his options, his strategic mind calculating every possible scenario, every potential move he could make to stay one step ahead of Jack and Matt, but the sheer audacity of their plan, the sheer betrayal of those he had trusted most, fueled a dark, consuming fire that made his usual calm, measured demeanor impossible to maintain. He could feel his pulse pounding in his temples as he imagined the scene playing out, the confrontation that was inevitably coming, the clash of wills that would shake the foundations of Newman Enterprises, and perhaps the city itself. His eyes darted to the framed photographs on his desk, pictures of his children, of Victoria, Nicholas, Abby, and for the first time, he questioned the very fabric of loyalty and family, wondering if anyone could be truly trusted, if everyone was hiding some secret agenda behind polite smiles and hollow reassurances. The thought of Jack, so smug, so self-assured, standing there with that infuriatingly confident smirk while orchestrating Victor's demise, made his stomach churn with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. And Victor felt the familiar thrill of confrontation ignite within him, a reminder of why he had always thrived in chaos, why power had always been his drug of choice. Matt's involvement was even more troubling. His cunning, his ability to manipulate situations from the shadows, his penchant for playing both sides to his advantage meant that Victor could not afford to underestimate him, could not allow a single lapse in judgment, because even a moment's hesitation could result in the ruin of everything he had built. The loss of the empire that was not just a testament to his business acumen but a symbol of his dominance over Genoa City and everyone who dared oppose him. As he ran through possible countermeasures in his mind, from legal maneuvers to leveraging alliances within the business world, from subtle threats to overt intimidation, Victor's fingers drummed against the polished mahogany of his desk with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic, a physical manifestation of the storm of plotting and scheming that roared through his mind. Every idea was weighed, every risk calculated, yet beneath it all, a raw, emotional core of anger and betrayal throbbed, reminding him that no strategy could fully contain the visceral human response to treachery, that the need for retribution burned brighter than any business logic. He could almost hear Jack and Matt's laughter echoing through the halls of Newman Enterprises, mocking him, daring him to act, to show the cracks in his legendary armor, and that imagined sound drove him to pace faster, to grip the arms of his chair, to mutter under his breath threats that seemed almost absurdly theatrical, yet perfectly suited to the high-stakes, operatic nature of their lives. They'll regret this. Every last one of them. They'll wish they'd never crossed me. I'll make them pay, in ways they can't even imagine. Victor's mind was a maelstrom of dark fantasies, visions of confrontations, of humiliations inflicted upon those who dared challenge him, and yet, amidst the fury, there was a methodical, almost surgical precision that he could not suppress, a careful plotting that ensured his revenge would not be impulsive, not rash, because Victor Newman knew that the most devastating strikes were those that were calculated, patient, and utterly merciless. The memory of Jack's scheming face, of Matt's cool, sinister composure, played across his inner vision repeatedly, each replay sharpening his determination, and he imagined confronting them, cornering them in the boardroom or some dramatic public setting, exposing their treachery to the world in a moment that would cement his supremacy and remind everyone, once and for all, why Victor Newman was a man not to be crossed. Yet even as he plotted, he felt the creeping uncertainty of human unpredictability, the knowledge that no matter how meticulously he prepared, no plan was ever foolproof, and that vulnerability, the possibility of being outmaneuvered even by those he considered lesser adversaries, was a specter that haunted every moment of his existence. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls of his office suddenly oppressive, the ticking of the clock on the wall echoing like a countdown to inevitable confrontation, and Victor's mind oscillated between fury and fear, between the calculated brilliance that had always defined him and the raw, primal anger that made him human, reminding him that even the most formidable patriarch could be shaken by betrayal so close to home. And as he finally stopped pacing, standing in the center of the office with the weight of betrayal pressing down upon him like a physical force, Victor Newman allowed himself a single searing thought, a declaration that was as much a warning as it was a promise. They think they can take me down. They think they can play me. But they have no idea what they've unleashed. Jack. Matt. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning. And with that, the fire in his eyes burned brighter than ever, a warning to anyone who dared challenge him that Victor Newman was not a man who could be intimidated, not a man who could be defeated by whispers in the shadows or schemes hatched behind closed doors, because beneath the veneer of age, beneath the layers of empire and influence, beat the heart of a man who thrived on conflict, who rose from betrayal stronger than before, and who would stop at nothing to ensure that the scales of power always tipped in his favor, leaving Jack and Matt to wonder, perhaps too late, that in the world of the Newmans revenge was not just a word. It was a way of life, and Victor, more dangerous than ever, was ready to prove it. Victor's mind raced in a torrent of fury and strategy, each thought sharper than the last, as he considered not only Jack and Matt's betrayal but the countless others who might have been silently conspiring against him. Every ally he had ever trusted suddenly felt suspect, every smile potentially masking hidden agendas, and he could feel the walls of Newman Enterprises closing in, the familiar sense of omnipotence tempered by an unfamiliar vulnerability, a gnawing realization that power was never absolute, that even the greatest empires could crumble if the right pressure was applied in the right place, and yet, the fire of Victor Newman's indomitable will refuse to be extinguished, refusing to bow even in the face of what seemed like insurmountable treachery. He thought of Jack's smug demeanor, the way he had always managed to play the long game, manipulating both friend and foe with a precision that had always irritated Victor, and now, knowing that Jack had teamed up with Matt, a man whose loyalty had always been as unpredictable as his ambition, Victor felt a surge of adrenaline that made his pulse thunder in his ears. He could almost see the scenes playing out like a twisted movie in his mind, Jack whispering in Matt's ear, Matt nodding silently, the two of them weaving a web of deception that threatened to ensnare everyone and everything Victor had worked for, and the thought alone made his stomach knot, a mix of dread and the thrill of impending confrontation. Yet even in the midst of his rage, Victor's calculating mind began to map out every possible response, every angle, every subtle manipulation that could turn the tables, because Victor Newman was not a man who reacted impulsively, not when the stakes were this high, not when the very future of his legacy hung in the balance. He was a predator in his element, and every moment of anger only sharpened his instincts, honed his awareness, and reminded him that patience, cunning, and ruthlessness were his most powerful weapons. His gaze drifted across the room, settling on the artifacts of his life and empire, the gleaming awards, the meticulously organized files, the photographs of his children and family, reminders of both love and leverage, the duality of his existence as both patriarch and mogul, and he realized with chilling clarity that every relationship, every alliance, every partnership could be weaponized in this escalating battle, turned into a shield or a sword depending on how carefully he orchestrated his moves. The very thought of turning his family against each other, of manipulating loyalties to expose hidden weaknesses, sparked a thrill that was almost intoxicating. After decades of wielding influence and control, Victor knew exactly how to exploit the human psyche, how to plant seeds of doubt, how to engineer confrontations that left his enemies unraveling, and now, with Jack and Matt unknowingly underestimating him, he saw the beginnings of a perfect storm, a scenario in which their overconfidence would become their undoing. Victor imagined confronting Jack first, in a setting that would maximize humiliation and assert his dominance, not just over his son but over the narrative itself, public enough to send a warning to every rival and ally alike, yet carefully orchestrated so that every word, every glance, every subtle gesture would be a calculated move in a larger game of chess, one where Victor Newman was always the unseen hand guiding the outcome. Matt, by contrast, required a different approach. Subtle psychological pressure that would reveal his insecurities, exploit his ambition, and force him into mistakes that Victor could then leverage for ultimate advantage. The duality of these strategies consumed Victor, every scenario playing out in his mind with cinematic clarity. Jack cornered in the boardroom, flustered and defensive as Victor calmly laid bare every betrayal, every manipulation, every secret plan. Matt ensnared by circumstances of his own making, trapped in a web of his own ambition, unable to see the trap until it was far too late, and all the while, Victor standing above it all, orchestrating, controlling, omnipotent in his ability to turn chaos into power. And yet, amidst this intricate plotting, there was a raw human undercurrent of emotion, a pulse of rage, a vein of betrayal, a lingering hurt that reminded Victor that he was not just a strategist but a man who had been personally wronged, whose family, the very people he had built his life around, had conspired in secret against him, and the combination of calculated revenge and primal emotion made him a force unlike any other, a storm that could not be stopped, only endured, if at all. He imagined the first move, gathering intelligence, planting misinformation, ensuring that Jack and Matt believed they were the hunters when in reality Victor was already steps ahead, anticipating every maneuver, every whispered conversation, every clandestine alliance, turning their own tactics against them with ruthless efficiency. He considered potential allies both old and new, those whose loyalty could be secured with favors, threats, or exposure of inconvenient truths, and he realized that the battlefield extended far beyond the walls of Newman Enterprises. Genoa City itself was a stage upon which this drama would unfold, every friend, foe, business associate, and rival becoming a piece in the intricate game he was about to play. The thrill of this realization sent a shiver down his spine. Victor Newman thrived on conflict, on drama, on the intricate dance of power and betrayal, and now with his enemies laid bare before him, he felt the intoxicating rush of anticipation, the delicious taste of inevitability as he prepared to unleash a series of maneuvers that would leave Jack and Matt reeling, exposed, and utterly at his mercy. Even as he plotted, he allowed himself a moment of reflection, a brief acknowledgement of the human cost of such machinations, the fear, the pain, the heartbreak that would ripple through those caught in the crossfire, and yet, in Victor's mind, this was not collateral damage but necessary consequences, the unavoidable fallout of ambition and betrayal, the price of existing in a world where power was the ultimate currency and loyalty was a commodity to be bought, sold, or discarded at will. And then came the final terrifying clarity. This was not merely about revenge, nor was it simply about survival. This was about asserting dominance, about ensuring that no one would ever again question Victor Newman's supremacy, that every whisper of doubt, every shadow of rebellion, every faintest flicker of challenge would be crushed beneath the weight of his unrelenting will. He pictured the confrontation in excruciating detail, the expression on Jack's face as he realized too late that his plans were transparent, that his attempts at subterfuge had been anticipated at every turn, the flicker of panic, the tightening of his jaw, the cold realization that the son he thought he could manipulate had underestimated him. Matt, cowering in the background, his carefully constructed facade cracking as Victor methodically dismantled every argument, every scheme, every illusion of control, and Victor, serene yet terrifying, standing as the immovable force that no betrayal, no alliance, no ambition could overcome. And in that moment, Victor allowed himself a cold, satisfying smile, a smile that was both promise and warning, a symbol of the dark, brilliant mind at work, the mind that had orchestrated empires, manipulated entire cities, and survived countless betrayals to stand invincible and unbowed, a testament to the power of strategy, the inevitability of retribution, and the relentless, consuming force of Victor Newman's will, ready to strike, ready to dominate, and ready to remind Genoa City and the world that crossing Victor Newman was not merely a mistake. It was a sentence, a declaration that for those who dared defy him, the consequences would be absolute, devastating, and unforgettable. As he finally straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his tailored suit, Victor felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, that intoxicating mix of fear and power, knowing that the next moves he made would ripple across every corner of his empire, altering alliances, shattering egos, and leaving Jack and Matt to confront the terrifying reality that they had awakened a storm far greater than they could possibly imagine. And Victor Newman, fueled by betrayal, rage and unquenchable ambition, was ready to unleash it in full force, ensuring that those who dared plot against him would never forget the wrath of a man who had lost control only to find it multiplied, sharpened, and turned into the most lethal weapon imaginable. Victor Newman's mind continued to whirl with strategies, each one more intricate and ruthless than the last, as he imagined the domino effect that would ripple through Genoa City once he set his plans into motion. The thought of Jack and Matt, so confident in their secret alliance, completely unaware that Victor had already anticipated their every move, sent a thrill through him that was equal parts exhilaration and vindictive satisfaction, and he could feel the familiar pulse of adrenaline, quickening in his veins, sharpening every thought, every instinct, until his entire being seemed to vibrate with the intensity of impending confrontation. He considered the vulnerabilities of his enemies with surgical precision. Jack, ever the schemer, had a need to appear superior, to control the narrative, and yet that very arrogance was his weakness, a flaw Victor could exploit with carefully placed truths, subtle manipulations, and public humiliation that would leave Jack scrambling to salvage whatever dignity he could muster, all while Victor remained the unassailable force at the center of the storm. Matt, on the other hand, was a different challenge, cool, calculating, capable of hiding his emotions behind a veneer of logic, yet inherently ambitious and impatient, driven by desires that could be manipulated, leveraged, and ultimately used against him if Victor played his cards with patience and precision. He could bait Matt into overreach, trick him into exposing secrets, and then pounce with the full force of Newman power, leaving him exposed and humiliated before anyone else in the city could even comprehend what had happened. As Victor paced, the polished floors of his office reflecting the dim glow of the evening lights, he allowed himself to play through dozens of scenarios, each one more devastating than the last, imagining every conversation, every subtle expression, every potential slip that could be exploited to maximum effect, and in each mental replay, he refined his tactics, eliminating weaknesses, anticipating reactions, and constructing a plan so intricate that Jack and Matt would never see it coming, until it was far too late. The sheer scale of what he was contemplating, the total domination of those who had dared to conspire against him, was exhilarating, and yet there was an undercurrent of tension, a faint whisper of danger, reminding Victor that even the most meticulous plans could falter if the unpredictable variables of human emotion came into play. Still, the thrill of the challenge only sharpened his focus, intensifying his determination to strike not only with force but with brilliance, ensuring that every move would reinforce his supremacy, while simultaneously dismantling the carefully constructed facades of his adversaries. He envisioned the sequence of events with cinematic clarity, the initial confrontation staged so that Jack would feel the crushing weight of betrayal publicly, a moment designed not just to humiliate but to assert authority, while Matt, watching from the shadows, would be caught off guard by a subtle twist in Victor's strategy, blindsided by a revelation that forced him to choose between loyalty to Jack and self-preservation, both options leading to his ultimate downfall. And all the while, Victor would remain untouchable, the eye of the storm, the puppet master orchestrating the chaos with unmatched skill. The thought of exposing secrets, manipulating alliances, and turning friends into unwitting instruments of his revenge filled Victor with a dark satisfaction, a sense of power that was both intoxicating and terrifying in its totality. He could feel the pulse of anticipation in the air, the weight of imminent action pressing against his chest, and he allowed himself a brief moment to savor the thrill of control, the intoxicating certainty that every move, every whispered conversation, every hidden agenda was already within his grasp, ready to be deployed at the perfect moment. And yet, even as he plotted with meticulous care, a small, persistent voice within him reminded him of the human cost of his machinations, the fear, the pain, the heartbreak that would ripple through the lives of those caught in his wake, the innocent bystanders whose lives would be irrevocably altered by the sheer force of his ambition and fury. And for a brief instant Victor considered tempering his wrath, considering mercy, considering restraint. But those thoughts were fleeting, quickly banished by the inexorable drive that had defined his existence. The uncompromising will to dominate, to conquer, to assert the supremacy of Victor Newman over anyone foolish enough to oppose him. He thought of his empire, the sprawling network of influence and power that extended from the skyscrapers of Genoa City to the intimate corners of the Newman family, and he understood with chilling clarity that control was never guaranteed, that every decision, every alliance, every subtle deception could tip the balance, and that to maintain dominance, he would need to act with both precision and ruthlessness, leaving no margin for error, no space for hesitation, no tolerance for weakness. The image of Jack and Matt, so confident in their secret alliance, played repeatedly in his mind, each replay revealing another weakness, another opening, another potential leverage point, and Victor felt the thrill of inevitability settle over him like a cloak of power. He would dismantle their schemes, expose their duplicity, and in the process, reinforce his status as the unchallenged patriarch, the omnipotent force whose reach and influence were unmatched, whose cunning and strategic brilliance were feared and revered by all who knew his name. Every scenario, every confrontation, every subtle manipulation he imagined was infused with a sense of theatricality, a recognition that in the world of Genoa City, spectacle mattered as much as strategy, and that the impact of his actions would be measured not only in outcomes but in the shock, awe, and humiliation of those who had dared to cross him. He would craft each moment to maximize emotional and psychological effect, ensuring that Jack and Matt, and anyone else who might entertain thoughts of defiance, understood viscerally and irrevocably the consequences of betraying Victor Newman. And as he continued to pace, the polished wood of his office reflecting the intensity in his eyes, Victor allowed himself to drift into darker imaginings, scenarios where every ally was tested, every secret laid bare, every hidden ambition turned against its owner, a vast, intricate web of manipulation that would leave Jack and Matt scrambling in desperation, exposed and broken, and Victor standing above it all calm, composed, and utterly in control, a master of both the visible and invisible currents of power that defined life in Genoa City. He pictured the moment of reckoning with Jack, the carefully timed revelation, the strategic exposure of betrayal, the precise orchestration of events that would leave Jack reeling, unsure how to respond, unable to reclaim control, and forced into a position of vulnerability that would permanently alter the dynamics of their relationship, reminding everyone who witnessed it that Victor Newman was not a man to be trifled with, not a man whose authority could be questioned, not a man whose wrath could be ignored. Matt, meanwhile, would be drawn into the trap through his own ambition, his own desire for influence and recognition, manipulated by subtle cues, carefully timed events, and the strategic deployment of information that would exploit every weakness, every insecurity, every unspoken desire, and leave him complicit in his own downfall, a pawn undone by the very traits that had once made him formidable. And Victor's satisfaction at the inevitability of their unraveling was almost palpable, a dark, intoxicating delight that surged through him in waves, leaving him both exhilarated and unerringly serene, the eye of a storm that he had created and controlled with unerring precision. And yet, as he contemplated the execution of his plan, Victor reminded himself that timing would be everything, the subtle art of patience, the ability to wait for the exact moment when leverage, opportunity, and psychological pressure converged, would determine the success of his strategy, and he felt the familiar thrill of anticipation, that heady mixture of control, intellect, and raw emotion that had always defined him, a reminder that in the intricate, high-stakes world of Genoa City, victory belonged not to the strongest nor the fastest but to the most cunning, the most relentless, the most unyielding, and Victor Newman, fueled by betrayal, rage, and an insatiable hunger for dominance, was all three. Every detail, from the positioning of allies to the timing of revelations, from the calculated exposure of secrets to the careful orchestration of public perception, was considered, weighed, and refined, until Victor felt a deep, satisfying sense of inevitability settle over him. The game was set, the pieces were in place, and the fall of Jack and Matt was all but assured, a consequence of their own arrogance, ambition, and failure to recognize the force they had dared to challenge. And as the night deepened outside the Newman mansion, casting long shadows across the sprawling estate, Victor Newman paused for a moment, breathing deeply, savoring the tension, the anticipation, the raw power of knowing that the storm he was about to unleash would reshape lives, alter alliances, and remind everyone who dared to cross him that in the world of Victor Newman, betrayal was never forgotten, weakness was never tolerated, and vengeance, when wielded by a mind as brilliant and ruthless as his own, was not merely a response, it was an art, a legacy, and an unstoppable force, one that would leave Jack, Matt, and the rest of Genoa City forever changed, and Victor Newman standing, as always unbroken, undefeated, and utterly terrifying in his brilliance and fury.